Hello, host Sibo.
Ni hao. Welcome to Planet of the Climates. POTK is a KlimaDAO podcast to bring you the latest information and insight into the world of climate action. Klima is a blockchain protocol backed by carbon credits that gives people a chance to fight climate change as a collective. My name is Phaedrus, and I'll be your host on this adventure. I'm joined by my good friend and co-host Reikuman. Reiku, what do we have in store for our friends today?
Today we'll be talking with Asfi and Archimedes for a very special anniversary episode. Let's jump right in.
So today we're excited to be celebrating Klima's first anniversary. Maybe that's a KLIMAVERSARY. We've brought back our very first POTK guest, Asfi, as well as Klima co-founder and POTK veteran, Archimedes. The podcast kicked off in style a year ago through an inspiring conversation with Asfi, where he shared his story around the DeFi roots with OlympusDAO and what drew him to become an early climate. As our later episode with Archimedes continues to be one of our most listened to episodes, we've now surpassed 30,000 all-time downloads. So we really appreciate that and appreciate you for being along the ride for the journey here too. So happy to have both of you here for this little bit of a retrospective or a fireside chat. I think we're all 1 year older at least, and maybe it feels like 5 years wiser. I don't know how much the actual mileage is here, but it's been quite a year. So right off the top, maybe for both of you, whoever would like to jump in first, what's been your highlight memory of the last 365 days, whether that's something in real life, in DeFi, or, maybe Klima related, but not necessarily?
I mean, my second daughter was born 40 days ago. So that's the current highlight. From a crypto perspective, I guess more recently, I've just been digging a lot into literature published by people who got Nobel Prizes in economics. But basically what I'm doing is I have a degree in economics and, I've been an investment banker and a private equity fund manager most of my life. But I guess the biggest thing I went through with crypto was there was a brief moment where I was like, oh, I think I understand how this works. And then I guess now I'm at the point where I'm like, I don't know anything, not just about crypto, but even the things that I've studied. And so I've kind of been going back to some of this literature and then tying it up with some of these fun on-chain experiments that are happening. So trying to read a healthy mix of older academics, but contemporary ones too. So in the contemporary ones, George Selgin comes to mind, Barry Merling comes to mind. Basically nerding out a lot. Kind of always done that all my life. And now, doing that more professionally, I guess.
So Archie, how about for you over the last 365 days there? What sticks out for you?
Ooh, there's a lot of memories I could point at. Some good, some bad. There were definitely times that were very challenging for what we were doing. The one that sticks out to me the most is the first 2 days of the launch, where I basically did not sleep, and me and Atmos were patching stuff left, right, and center to get this whole thing running. That was a very stressful 2 days. I mean, the first couple months were definitely brutal. We were meticulously monitoring absolutely everything, every single request that came through. This is a bug, this needs to be fixed. We were fixing everything. That was a lot of fun. I really as crazy as it was a lot of fun just doing that. Yeah, I mean, I have other memories. I'm I met a lot of the team for the first time in years. These are people I've known for a long time, but I've never met in person. So in the last year, I went and visited a couple of them. I'm going to visit a few more of them in this month. So it's going to be cool. I get to see people I've worked with for so long on the internet in real life. That's going to be cool.
So jumping back to Asfi, you have been an OG OMI exploring Olympus world of DeFi before you found Klima. Maybe you want to just check in with you, have you actually reflect a little bit on what Olympus has brought to the table and how the original idea of Klima was built on that in your mind?
I didn't know anything about crypto till last summer. And that's what I talked to you about in the first time we spoke, that I was on this mission for internet for all. My plan was falling apart. And then I saw this technology that could run an internet service on a crypto backend. So that was a moment of, oh, this is so interesting. And so Olympus I found through a Google search and then started doing a Twitter search. I was really, really fascinated by, mainly I think in hindsight, I think what fascinated me more than Olympus was the dashboard, because I could track activity. My core skill is financial modeling and doing deals. And, being able to see a balance sheet for the first time and see it update on the hour, every hour, that was really cool. I think that's what got me hooked. But in a more reflective way, I think, it was the I think the really big breakthrough is the bootstrapping mechanism. It's the bonding mechanism. To your second question about tying it with Klima, I mean, I thought it was a really lovely idea to use that bootstrapping mechanism in order to buy a ton of carbon credits in order to do two things: drive up the price of carbon and also make a transparent on-chain carbon market. So that idea appealed to me then, and it continues to appeal to me now.
Excellent. Definitely appreciate that answer and that perspective on what Klima was bringing to the table and kind of standing on the shoulders, I guess, of the Olympus DeFi world, right?
I mean, it's changed so much, right? And I think for the better, both protocols. I mean, I had the pleasure of meeting Dionysus and Sai Ziggy in DC. We had gone to meet some US government lawmakers to basically say, crypto is not all crazy. And what was encouraging was that I felt that they were able to understand, I would say, the crypto use case relatively easily when we were talking about Klima. But for me personally, what was cool was meeting these two very talented guys and just kind of realizing that, okay, so they have all these carbon tons on chain, and now they're thinking about how to make this treasury more useful through Klima Infinity. And it was very reassuring to spend time with them and see this team is continuing to push onwards and create utility, especially in a tense market. That was encouraging and very reassuring.
So Archie, I know we're kind of flipping back and forth here. Asfi, you just talked about kind of like where we're at, and Klima goes to Washington, and these chances to meet Klima core team in person there. Archie, you had mentioned earlier just that your big memory was kind of around launch time there. Just want to give you another chance again. That was October 18th, 2021. I know for myself, just hanging in the Discord server after the LBP launch was quite the vibes going on then for sure too. Just, any more, thoughts around launch time or reflections looking back behind the scenes about what was going on at that time?
Yeah, it was chaos. Let's not beat around the bush. It was chaos. Like at one point, I remember the Discord server crashed because there was too many people talking. People were like, "What's going on? Did they close the server?" We're like, "No, no one." And then there was other problems too, because I was trying to always talk to Atmos about all right, I've seen this 5 errors like this. Can you handle that? I'll handle this. We were going back and forth, and then it crashed for 6 hours. We couldn't talk to each other about what was going on. We're like, "Oh no, what are we gonna do?" It was dramatic to say the least, for sure. I mean, it was a good experience. I think that's what I would say is I learned a lot in that small short span of time of launching a product with this kind of demand. And I'm very fortunate to be part of that. But the harshest part of that whole thing is we did everything we thought we could in terms of planning. We're all right, we'll make sure this goes on at this time, that will go out this way. This everything was scheduled, everything was planned, nothing was happening by the seat of our pants. And then as soon as it launched, it just blew up. The whole plan was just gone. And we were okay, well now we've got to fix this and we're gonna do that. So, I mean, it was good. I mean, I would say life leading up to it, that was probably really interesting too. We spent 6 months before that, thinking about this. We were talking about a project of some kind, in January of that year. We were collectively, the founders of the time, we were meeting kind of every week or almost every 2 weeks with ideas and being okay, how do we collectively put our talent together and figure out kind of all the stuff, because we had all worked together in some form in the past, small project here, small thing there. We knew everybody and we knew everybody was competent. It was just more okay, how do we harness this into something interesting? And then Olympus rolled around and we were what if we repurpose this? And then that's kind of the whole thing that we kind of, if you listen to the original Bankless episode where I talked with the other guys, we kind of rolled into those ideas and said, okay, can we launch this? Can we build this? And then we got to building. We started testing the idea. I mean, Asfi's right. A year later, things are very different now. Back then, it was definitely much more of an experiment and very much could this even be possible? And now the answer is yes. We know this. We've proven that thesis. An on-chain carbon market is not only possible, feasible, but also preferred in terms of actual quality. It's now about scaling it, right? And so that's kind of the next few years of what we're looking at is how do we scale this from 1 to 100? Because 0 to 1 is finished. We've basically proven that thesis. We know that it works. We know that it can be done. And now it's how do we take it to 100 times the size today? And that's, I think, the next phase of everything that we're discussing is okay, what contributes to that goal? What contributes to scaling? What contributes to all this? And a lot of things are out of our control, and then a lot of things are in our control. So we're trying very hard to remove a lot of those blockers and see what can be done. But it's the same. Like the mentality hasn't changed. This is what I'm getting at here is like since March last year or January last year, like we're always kind of planning the next steps. What are we doing? What are we doing? What are we thinking? What are we thinking? It's never like, I don't think we've ever found ourselves in a position where we were kind of rudderless and like, oh, we don't know what the next set of goals are. It's more like, how do we achieve them? And I think that's, yeah, I mean, for me, like it's like I spoke about Verra and like their statements, and, like how they view the whole market, and that's gonna be interesting. But ultimately, like we're very much in charge of our own destiny at this point. And to Asfi's point, like definitely we split from the Olympus ecosystem. Like, yeah, we definitely use the same mechanics and it all runs very similarly, but the end goals have totally changed, right? Like they have very much split. We have our clear path forward. We know exactly what we have to do, and so does Olympus. And so for that, we're like super grateful, super fortunate to have been able to contribute to the space in like a meaningful way. Man, no one thought that this whole like refi economy would emerge. For history and context, that's really important here, is the founders of Klima are people who basically founded or built foundational ideas to refi years prior. Like they were experimenting in this space way before anyone else. And that group is so small. It's like a few people and it's very, very niche. Like it never ever really grew to the size that it was today. After Klima, of course, you have like all these grants coming up. You have a gazillion projects launching here, there, and everywhere. And you have all these people like all of a sudden interested in this term refi. But like the core people who actually knew the potential of what this could be and how it could be built are the founders, are the people who basically put this together. So I talked about it on the birthday. I wrote a giant Twitter thread that we wouldn't be possible where we are today without the team, and it's definitely true. Like it's all these people, like they're uniquely poised to understand each element of what's happening. This is like another conversation we had with a lot of people was they were trying to understand what the value prop of what we were doing was, and they could only ever understand like one facet of it. They'd be like, okay, I get the crypto side, I get the like Olympus side, but I don't get the carbon side. And then like you'd have the reverse. You'd also have people like, okay, I understand the carbon side, I don't understand why crypto or this is involved. And so you very rarely had people who understood everything all at once. But the team was people who did. Like there's only like 10 people in the world who understand what we're about to do, and they're all in this room, right? It's like and I feel that way many like now even like there's a lot more people who understand definitely like if you look at the DAO in general, and like we've done a long way, but like people who truly understand the magnitude of what we're doing, there are very few of them, and it's people that will definitely like carry the torch in the future that will make this like the success can be. We got super lucky in our opportunity, but we were extremely well prepared, and we continue to be today.
Thank you very much, Archie, for the answer. I know you kind of like said no, but nevertheless, we still have to ask this question. I think the same goes for Asfi as well. I would love to hear your answer as well, which is, if there's one thing you think that we could have done differently, what would it be? Maybe I start with Archie first, since you're here on the mic.
Every decision we've made to this point was made with the best available information at the time, right? And I don't regret any decision we've made. I think everything we have to stand by, good and bad. Like some were good, some were better, some were not so great. It's just given like it's super easy to just look back and be like, oh yeah, like we could have done this better, we could have done that better. But at the time you didn't know what the outcome would be, right? Like in many cases, like a lot of the decisions we made were based on assumptions, they were based on ideas and based on speculation or models. Like I don't know how many models we built for the LBP, and by the end we were like looking at all of them, we're like, okay, like there's a median model here that we can use, and then as soon as it launched, it just got thrown out the window. So like there's an old saying that says you can never ever plan what the market is going to do to your product as much as you want to or think to. I don't know if I would do anything differently. I'd maybe consider how we approached registries maybe a bit differently, but at the same time, like kind of coming back to the history of Klima, like we were all already doing this in some form. Like we were already tokenizing carbon credits in some form or another. And there was like a lot of people working on different things, and these things were already happening, just not at the scale that was like concerning to Verra, right? Like 25 million tons on chain is something that definitely like, got their attention. And that's kind of what we wanted. And we all kind of suspected that would eventually happen. We were like, oh yeah, like, we're definitely like, if this takes off, like we always had this like idea in our head, like, like, if this works, if we are right, then this will gather attention of like every world organization when it comes to carbon and all this. And sure enough, it did. I just think the one thing we underestimated was how fast that would be. Like, it was within weeks that Verra already had a statement on tokenization and crypto and the markets. And we were like, oh, okay, well, we thought this was going to take a lot longer before that would happen. So, it's definitely had its impact. But yeah, I don't think we would have done anything differently. It's just, yeah, the way it is.
Also, Archie, it's no plan survives first contact with the enemy.
Yeah, yeah. That's the one.
I just want to say, as someone who spent a lot of times building plans, is that while that is true, but like a lot of planning, it does make you respond better because you are less likely to freak out.
Thank you. So for Asfi yourself, because Archie is from the inside, his core team, he sees everything from the inside, but from an outsider perspective, right? As you were kind of like thought leader at a point of time for us in the Klima community, what would you think that we could have done differently?
In hindsight, I was obviously very excited that, oh my God, this is like, I've found this Olympus mechanism. Now we're going to apply it. But in hindsight, I think I was really getting carried away with bull market euphoria. And that's something I've been reflecting on a lot. I think I was experiencing peak Dunning-Kruger. I have seen the toll that price action has taken on many contributors, many whom I know personally. And, so in some ways, I do find myself reflecting that, could I mean, and I don't want to give myself credit that like I'm the one who pumped the price, but like, I was definitely part of the cheerleading squad because I meant it. And I still do. Look, I mean, I've like, for what it's worth, haven't sold a single Klima. Will hold it, love the project. But I mean, I was kind of coming into crypto thinking these are startup investments. So they're going to be, even though they're liquid, they're going to be illiquid and you won't touch it for a while. That's kind of the mindset I came in with. I keep in mind, I didn't know crypto till May of like 2021. So that's something I, is a reflection for me.
Yeah, I agree that during that period of time, in fact, to a lot of people when we were doing our kind of like survey, right? If not just people who was in the market itself, but also a lot of like contributors, like community as well. It was their first ever like bull market. It was actually a really big bull market, and for some it's their first year in crypto. So when the market kind of like tanked, a lot of people didn't know how to react and didn't know what to do. So I think it's not just yourself, but I think as a whole, at the point of time, the whole market was still relatively young, still relatively new, and not going through a proper like full cycle of a bear and bull market. So it was tough for a lot of people, like myself included. Looking back, there's a lot of things that we could have done differently, but that's what it is. Like I would say that, yeah, lesson learned. It's good lessons that we've learned. Things that have changed a lot as well. And of course, this is the part where, that's like how I would say, how we grow, not just as an individual, but as a business, as a protocol itself. Of course, now that we have talked about what we have done differently, it's time to kind of like switch it up. So I really like to ask, right, since now as we have you here first, what do you think, in your view, or rather, what's Klima's bigger accomplishment to date so far for you, in your view?
I think it goes back to the line we talked about that, no battle plan survives first contact with the enemy. See, like some of this is shaped by me being an entrepreneur. I've been trying to create some business or another since 2009. So I've kind of gotten used to, the messiness of, I would say, early stage efforts. I'm in one now. I'm like approaching 40. I have 2 kids. I'm doing another early stage startup. So I think, and what I've seen in these efforts is that, like, plans teach you very little. I think the magic happens when you find that feedback loop and then you start evolving and you start iterating. And so, that is something that I see happening a lot at Klima, that like, yes, there was a lot of planning, Archie and co, they're all pretty deep into the world of climate finance, climate science. And then, they launch. And since then, so for me, I think the cool part has been watching the social innovation alongside the technological innovation, where, I mean, you guys, right? Like running this podcast, a number of contributors stepping up, getting involved. I think when this launched, like, I don't think Size Ziggy was involved to my understanding. Like, I think, someone like that joining a project, I'm like, okay, that's something I like, that I see like that this whole creature, which is the people supporting KlimaDAO and the protocol that is Klima, is now evolving, iterating, and it's in some pretty consequential conversations. It's getting cited in a bunch of work, whether it's Time Magazine or whether it's, it's in a lot of relevant conversations. So that for me is the part that's like, okay, good. So, you're in that feedback loop. And, so long as you don't get into a fight with each other, which causes you to say, I don't want to deal with you, which is how a lot of startups fall apart. And so long as you, don't run out of money, which is also why a lot of startups fall apart. And, you kind of survive long enough, I'm pretty certain, this thing will keep on evolving. And that is the story of every early stage startup. I think what's kind of unique about these, so-called DAOs or these very large internet-enabled organizations running in a Discord server is that there's just a lot of people who are like evolving together. And that has a lot of cons, plenty of DAO hate out there, which I understand. It's a difficult organization to navigate. But then at the same time, it's got some real beauty in it. And I guess the one thing that really makes my heart sing, and that's not just Klima, I think that's crypto at large, is like this greater efficiency that we see in labor and capital markets. There are some very talented people, particularly who are not in developed countries. So I'm from Pakistan. And so, for me, developing countries will always be a pretty big part of this conversation. And so, when I see someone from a non-OECD country, being a developer, creating videos, facilitating podcasts, this is fantastic, because these are now people conversing with developed country talent who they ordinarily would not have had a chance to converse with. And at the same time, there's a bunch of very interesting capital that's having these conversations for the first time. And so that combination, that whole organism that's evolving, that for me is okay, that I like that. And that makes me an enthusiastic investor, I'm psyched to see where this thing goes in the next year or so.
Right, thank you for that. How about you, Archie? What do you think is the biggest accomplishment to date?
I never thought I'd get cited in any sort of paper or project for what we've done. Not me specifically, but a project or something I worked on. That's huge in my books, just because that's a huge validation for the ideas that we've had for a long time. I think our biggest accomplishment, though, is also our worst accomplishment, is getting the attention of Verra.
Double-edged sword there.
Yeah, I think it's if you know the history of the VCM and basically Verra and Gold Standard and how they emerged and basically how they were started, they have been talking about integrating blockchain technology for years. There's been pilots, prototypes with Hyperledger, all sorts of weird stuff. During the ICO phase, they were experimenting, supposedly. There's been a lot of attempts. No one's actually done it, though. No one's cracked it. And so we were definitely the first to actually get it done, which subsequently made everybody who didn't get it done mad. But it is an accomplishment because it basically has pushed them to reevaluate their strategies and push them to think about, okay, how is the future going to look like, and should we improve the VCM? We all wanted change from Verra. I think the ultimate goal for many of us was that they issue tokens natively. They just, the registry itself is smart contract. It would solve so many problems. But that's a pipe dream for many of us. But it's definitely got them thinking about it in a more serious way. I definitely think that's our biggest accomplishment. From a macro perspective, you can talk about metrics and numbers, 25 million tons on chain, 18 million in the treasury. Klima on its own is a monumental accomplishment if you compare it against any other retail offsetting project that's raised money in the last 5 years. There are a couple ones. I won't say the name on this podcast, but they won't sell us their domain name. That's one thing I will say.
That's a dead giveaway to some extent.
I just yesterday I did some reverse engineering just for fun. I was I wonder truly how many, because you can look all this up, right? You can go on Verra and you can go in the registry and you can figure out how many offsets actually have occurred. So the Klima Infinity product that's emerged since March this year, that's when the retirement aggregator Cujo finished, and that's when we kind of launched it with a UI that was meaningful, and then obviously there's version 2 coming up, but whatever. That fundamentally it launched in March, and since then basically it's been integrated into every single product discussion or pipeline that goes into any sort of partnership or whatever. Collectively, KlimaDAO has retired 330,000 tons in that span of time. So for context, that's only 7 months, not even a year. Moss.Earth did like a couple massive retirements over the years. Like they're like the OGs in the space. They've been here since basically 2017, 2018, and they did 110,000. So it's still big. So kind of factor that all in, right? It doesn't sound like a lot in the context of like 25 million tons, 18 million, but then you compare it against competitors like the ones I just mentioned, who have raised something like $18 million in funding on a Series A, and like their pre-seed, so collectively maybe 25 million. And they have offset in the last 2 years, 21 and 22, basically like the 2 years that their product has existed, the app that they've developed, 69,000 tons on Verra. Now they also use gold standards, so I couldn't reverse engineer those because I didn't go in digging for those ones yet, but 69,000 tons. So like if you just want to compare raw magnitude, like it's just two worlds apart, right? It's completely different. And then like you talk about like actual capital efficiency too. Like you want to talk about how much money has gone into this ecosystem versus like others. It's far less. Like we spend way less, we do way more with the same amount of money. And so like our effort to impact is very high, extremely high. And I think that's one of my things I'm really proud of as an organization is it's really hard to make an impact, like really hard. And we've done it. Like we've done a very big one. You know, these things are important and they are definitely big accomplishments, something to be celebrated. But like the thing is, these numbers like to us are like cool for us, right? Like we collectively look at this dashboard, we look at the carbon.klima.dao.finance and like, we look at all that stuff and we're like, wow, that's so awesome. Like look at those numbers. We're so miles beyond what everything's done. And that's what makes me so excited for the future is like, I just know that's going to continue to grow. So like the gap between us and them, I like to say, is already large and it's going to just get bigger over time. Like we never stop. There's always something new, then there's always something pushing forward. Like to me, those accomplishments are massive. Like I think they're really, really cool. And I think once you start digging in and like really examining the space for what it is colossal. And I think we always forget about how big it is.
Absolutely. Yeah. You talked about that gap between us and other projects perhaps, and there's undoubtedly a gap between, you know, where we are and where we need to be as well too, looking forward. But yeah, just to kind of pick up on what you're talking about there a little bit too, you know, over this last year, we've got our good friends at Moss that were, you know, in before us, but, you know, the refi ecosystem has definitely blossomed. You know, we're seeing, you know, other carbon credit tokenization projects, other nature-based tokens and projects, other chains get involved too. We've got Silicon Valley VCs stepping in to fund projects. You know, now that there's so much interest and so much activity going on, how can Klima, you know, maintain its first mover advantage, or is that crucial in your mind? You know, you really talked about competition there. You know, to what extent do you see that continuum between competition and cooperation, since, you know, so many of these other players are also part of the Klima ecosystem too?
Yeah, this is actually one we discuss quite often in the strategy, like weekly calls that we do with the team, and everyone's got their own opinion, right? Like everyone's different. I can just give you mine. I think we can maintain our first mover forever in a sense that like there is like such a large gap financially between us and the next leader, simply because of the raw amounts of tonnage we have. So like 18 million tons. If you were to recreate KlimaDAO today, it would cost you a fortune. And you would have to spend a fortune to get colossal amounts of tonnage. Then forget about all the other stuff we've built in, like integrations, like all the sushi swap stuff, all the new stuff that we're doing with like all these other proposals. Like to get even there, like you would still always be playing catch up. So this first mover advantage, like I talked about this actually almost a year ago. I said this to the team and I said, guys, like, I don't think you understand how big first mover advantage is in crypto. It is massive. Like it is so much bigger than it is in Web 2, because not only do you have first mover, but you're also like more likely to actually succeed. Because like there's a stat that's like floated quite often. It's an old one, but it's like 93% of crypto startups like fail within the first year. It's an abysmal failure rate, and it's colossal. It's brutal. And if you compare that against Web 2, like 1 in 10 startups like get somewhere, so like 10%, and then 1 out of 100 actually hit like escape velocity is like the typical statistic. There's like a lot of nuance on that number, but like it still is low, but it's still higher than like crypto. Crypto is just like you don't even hit like success in any sort of way. So the fact that we've gotten this far, we've maintained this gap, is just like you have to overcome those odds and on top of that spend a lot of money. Like it's just, and so this also begs the question, all right, so do you compete against Klima or do you work with us? In our view, it's always about cooperation. It's always about like, can we work with this organization or find some way to work with them? So a lot of projects are like realigning their ideas. They're basically saying, maybe we should work with Klima, or maybe we should figure out an angle to figure that out. And we're open to it, right? We always say yes. Like we're really not interested in competing against. And I say this in like this. I probably sound awful and arrogant in this entire podcast. So I apologize to anyone listening, but it's more just like this is all data driven, right? Winners have been chosen, and we have basically this like thing. So what's I think emerging from Refi Summer and like all these people like actually sobering up with their ideas is that they've realized that it's no longer Refi versus Verra. It's very much DeFi versus banks. It's still like the old discussion that we're having, not at even our level, but at a much higher level, like just Ethereum versus literally any banking institution or, banking the unbanked and all that stuff. So we're now like looking at, okay, how do we collectively pursue goals together that like further that in a way that's meaningful? Because otherwise, if we don't cooperate, our competition, which is not within Web3, it's Web2, they will beat us, right? Like they'll crush us at regulation, they'll crush us at legislation, they'll crush us at censorship and centralization. Like we will just won't ever be able to get ahead. And I think it's important, like for the next year, especially for scaling, like if we really want to scale this whole system, it's got to be so big that these entities can't ignore it. And I think that's what you started to see with Ethereum and like the actual like DeFi space. Like when it first came out, it was a hilarious rug factory, and DeFi Summer was like super funny. And like you could like, everyone was farming food coins, and like there was nothing like nothing of value was like actually being created. It was just like comedic effect. But later, well, like a lot of really sophisticated instruments emerged as a result. And Olympus actually, if you look at the history, like Olympus is a lesson that was taught in DeFi Summer. Like they basically learned that Pool 2 was no good and that you couldn't provide incentives forever. So how do you bootstrap stuff, and how do you bootstrap an entire economy without that? And so those designs actually came from a lot of those early lessons. And those early lessons are now being taught in Refi. Like they've kind of figured that out. And I think that what they've realized is it's much better to work together on like a collective goal to move forward. And that's kind of what's happening in DeFi, right? Like they all kind of merge on the same things, and they're like, okay, we got to push legislation forward, we got to work together to make sure the bill doesn't pass, we got to make sure that this gets adopted, we got to make sure that this banking institution recognizes this is valid, and like all this stuff that like collectively furthers the entire space forward. And I think that's what we're going to see in the Refi space as well. Is like everyone's going to start looking at goals collectively, like how do we move the full space forward? And I think that's what I had a conversation with a couple of protocols this week and last week about basically saying we all have the same goal, it seems, is we want Verra to allow tokenization. We want these like massive registries to basically say yes to this new technology and innovation. And without it, like many of the projects that like have started or attempting to start up, like a lot of like the forward stuff where they're like, oh, like we're going to do blue carbon in the ocean, we're going to do like forestry management, all that stuff, it's irrelevant what they accomplish until that like piece gets unlocked, right? Because they're like, well, if we can't tokenize what we're creating, then how are we going to create these credits? How are we going to register them on a registry if they don't see it as valid? This is what I mean. Like we're going to go a lot further together than we are going to go separately. And I think that's kind of what's emerging, and I'm hopeful that that's kind of where the future goes.
I want to say one thing about, just what Archie was talking about. I mean, if a startup figures out distribution before the incumbent figures out the innovation, that's generally when a startup wins. So, from that sense, I think it's just, worth highlighting that, like, even though Verra as a standards body, it does feel a bit like an incumbent here, it's, I'm kind of used to seeing that. And I think, it's encouraging from my perspective to see that, Klima's well on its way to figuring out distribution. So great job on that. On, where do I see DeFi going? I think people are really hooked, man. I mean, Matt Levine wrote a 40,000 word article, and he's a crypto skeptic. I loved his writing. I think he's a phenomenal researcher and writer. I think reading up on how Olympus was described, the APY and the 3.3 and him calling it a Ponzi, that was painful for me to read, but it was also a moment of reflection for me on, why he said what he did. And that was largely a function of the content that was available to him. But the flip side of that whole experience was that crypto gets you hooked in a funny way. I'm guessing, you guys have been here longer, so it's like it starts forcing you to challenge a lot of your assumptions and learn a bunch of new things because you're getting bombarded with data. I guess that's kind of been the first attraction too, right? Like we finally have a lab where we can get transaction level data and run experiments. Like just, for one context, one thing I'll throw in here, right? Like in Denationalization of Money, Friedrich Hayek is writing this in 1974. He describes a privately issued currency called the ducat, which would be nominally backed by fiat, and it would issue its own currency that is backed by fiat. And Hayek is speculating that this currency will have a premium over its backing because supply will be curtailed and they're going to try to maintain price stability. Now, fast forward to 2021, and you see one version of his thesis validated, a new form of currency that is backed by fiat, but it is giving an indication to regulate supply, is going to have a monetary premium, which is what we saw with Olympus. So I think that genie's out of the bottle. Digital scarcity is a really, really big deal. And if you can build computer programs on top of digital scarcity, that's an even bigger deal. Now, will this whole scheme run into the face of authoritarian regimes and governments and regulators? Absolutely. I think it's going to be, I would say, cautiously optimistic that I think the United States will continue to make good decisions. But broadly, I mean, I see these systems challenging a lot of authority. And I think governments are going to push back quite a bit. But more and more people who take a deep enough look, they get pretty hooked, including the skeptics, because it's so fascinating. It's so fast moving. I am psyched about the future of DeFi. I don't know how governments are going to respond. My bet is that they're going to throw in a lot of wrenches. And, it's going to be pretty hard because the nexus between governments and banks is very strong, right? Banks finance. Yes, governments print money, but banks finance government incompetence, essentially. Right? That is a very strong nexus. The opponents that like DeFi and crypto is up against, they're pretty powerful. And I think they're also waking up to realize this little weird innovation is actually scary. And it's not just like governments, right? I mean, it's like you see Apple, a 2 trillion market cap company, being like, okay, in the App Store, you can't start listing. I mean, I'm not comfortable with your NFTs giving some gated access. Reading Apple's new rules on the App Store related to cryptocurrency, reading up generally on, government response to DeFi and cryptocurrency. It doesn't look like that, I would say the guardians of these nation states are accepting this thing with open arms because they're like, damn, this is scary challenger. And so, I think in that respect, I take a lot of comfort looking at Bitcoin's history, particularly, when I think about how a country like China tried to ban Bitcoin mining, but the program was just able to adjust by lowering the difficulty. That's pretty cool. I am not that convinced that a whole lot of other crypto projects can really survive a government onslaught. Particularly in DeFi and particularly around Ethereum. I think if including many of the projects I support, if a government really wanted to shut something down, many of these projects haven't reached the kind of Bitcoin level resilience in terms of that. Even China can't shut it down. Can we get there? That's something I'm hoping and staying on the ride for, because with so much capability, people such as yourselves, we'll hopefully get there.
Oh, excellent. Definitely appreciate that perspective and that view on the resilience and what's going to be necessary for the long run. Definitely a challenge.
Yep, definitely that. This question is actually for Arch itself. So if the Verra consultation doesn't pan out well, what would be Klima's plan B, C, or even D?
I mean, it's just there is a lot to consider, right? The biggest risk, existential risk, kind of to Asfi's point, can we outgrow the size, or can we become resilient enough to these entities that face us? This was always something we knew going into this. We knew this was going to be a challenge. There was an opportunity at one point where we were discussing, what if they don't like it? What if they hate it? What if they hate us? What if they want this to be closed? What if they spend their entire treasury trying to destroy us? It was a thought we all considered. We were like, this is a very material risk to the entire project, and how do we address it? And I think it's exactly that. You got to become so big that you can't be ignored. There's a lot to be said about kind of like what we were talking about earlier, is like competition versus opportunity to cooperate. Like the actual bridging freeze that's occurring right now is exactly that. It's like if we can show these institutions that if we cooperate, we are much bigger than them, that definitely sends a different message versus like if we're all competing for the same yield, then it doesn't really matter. Like they're just gonna ignore us, be like, look, see, like they're ephemeral. They'll be forgotten in a year or two. The longer we're here, so let's say like 5 years from now we're doing this podcast again, there's this lasting permanence that's like somehow outlasted everything we've thrown at them. They continue to build stuff, they continue to do things, and they're totally unchanged by how this is operating. That's kind of what you've seen with the Bitcoin Ethereum communities, is like it was very much opposed in many institutions and remains like a controversial thing, but slowly you're starting to see the change, right? Like in the last few years, definitely, like there's definitely been more clear legislation, regulation on how to operate it as an instrument. There is a lot of good things that have come out over those years. All of it has to do with the fact that there's time has passed. The longer people sit with an idea, the longer they can come to terms with it. And I think that's kind of what's happened. Is it was all so new so fast, and these organizations don't know what to do with it, and they have to think about it, and that's fine. I mean, that's typically what happens with incumbents. And to Asfi's point, like it's totally like how they operate. They want to reflect, carefully measure out everything. So I think that lasting permanence is going to go a long way, and that's the strategy. Is like we're here for a long time, and we're not going anywhere. We're going to weather this out, and we're going to continue to like explore every single avenue possible to move things forward.
Yep. So Archie, right? So looking forward, where do you see, or where do you hope to see Klima 1 year from now?
I can't. We actually had this call like 2 weeks ago. We were on the team when we were talking about. It's like what's like a goal for us that's like realistic. And since we can't do any more bridging, we're like, okay, well, what we can do is we can do retirements. And so like we said, at a minimum next year we should have another 330,000 tons retired, like at a very minimum, and then maybe even more. Like people were saying, well, we should be like closer to 1 million. Like we should be, definitely starting to scale the level of our sales effort. And I think that's doable. I think it's definitely doable. There are some large companies joining the space, traditional companies with huge footprints that are like looking to offset. Even in the Web3 space, like we're looking at integrations that could possibly drive everything, right? So SushiSwap is like one good one that we've been testing for a while. We're looking at other DEXs that have similar setups or different ones. I actually wrote a couple prototypes already. Those are going out. So there's a lot of like stuff that's coming out, and all of it points to one thing: is just sales numbers, right? So like offsetting is a sales game, right? That's all it is. And it's going to take not just like core team and like the few contributors. It's going to take the entire DAO like essentially selling. Like, and I'm famous for saying that in the DAO, is always be closing, because any meeting I go to, I'm always trying to sell them something. Oh, you know what? That'd be great. We'd love to partner with you, but you got to offset. And then like there's always like something that comes out of it, and they're like, yeah, and more often than not, people are willing to say yes, because it's generally not like a huge deal for them, and it's like it's a win-win-win scenario for everybody. We use their product, they get publicity out of it, and they get to offset their footprint, and we make a sale. I think that's kind of like what we've all landed on, is the next year is going to be a huge sales effort, huge. And I think I think that's what I want to see in the next year, is like a very targeted, a very sophisticated sales machine that basically moves this whole thing forward.
Yeah, that's great. Definitely back to you, Asfi, as well, too, if you had anything else you'd like to chime in on.
My closing thought is take care of yourselves. That's for all the contributors. This is a bear market. Don't drive yourselves crazy, and treat yourself as a system. You need to take care of yourselves in order to perform your best.
Well, that's a great message for the community, and a healthy one there with self-care and sustainability to be in this for the long haul. Well, Excellent. Yeah, it was definitely great to chat with Asfi and Archie there, and Reiku. Just a great chance to kind of, reminisce about this journey. It's been quite a past year, especially even here on the podcast too. We've just hit our 30,000 download mark, and it was a great chance to look back and have a chat with Asfi, who was our very, very first guest back in the day, almost exactly a year from now too. Did you have any reflections on the discussion that we just had there with, where Klima is going and how well positioned Klima is to weather this crypto winter that we seem to be entering, or we're in the middle of right now?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I feel it's really important is that this is something that we do that can potentially change our lives. Maybe I'm getting a bit philosophical because I just came back from New Zealand, and I know I really admired the nature and the beauty. It was incredible, and it got me thinking, like, what Klima is protecting at the end of the day. It's the beauty of nature itself. Like, I was just sharing with you, Phaedrus, I was there and I experienced an Antarctic blast, and I was supposed to be at like 5 to 10 degrees and it went -1 because of climate change. Things like this happen. Like, I experienced it firsthand myself. Crazy weather, and just because of climate change. And 1 year ago we talked so much about it, and right now we have actually more than 20 million tons of carbon. And I totally agree with what Archie said. Like, we got the attention of Verra, and that's what we always wanted to, challenge the norm and make it accelerate the things about, fighting the fight against climate change. And I feel that we have done something in the 1 year, and I'm really excited to see what's next.
Yeah, you mentioned those tons. I mean, that's just a massive opportunity there ahead for us too to make a real impact on climate change. Well, that's great. Definitely good to kind of reflect on this conversation that we just had, and hopefully you enjoyed that conversation too with our first episode guests returning, Asfi and Archie, co-founder of KlimaDAO. Yeah, so thank you everybody for helping us along this journey and hitting that 30,000 download mark. We so appreciate you, and we would so appreciate it as well if you can leave a like, subscribe, comment, follow, whatever it is on your favorite podcast platform. And it would be extra awesome if you were able to leave a comment saying that, you've been here along for the ride for a year. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this 1 year journey we've had together on the Planet the Climates podcast. So yes, otherwise, for everything Klima, make sure that you're hitting up KlimaDAO.finance, where you can stake bond, and yes, discover the link to our Discord community. So we hope that you'll join us, and you're going to find a great group of Climates and plenty of opportunities to contribute as well too along the way. We hope you really enjoyed this chat with Asfi and Archie, and we'll look forward to connecting with you once again on the very next Planet of the Climates.